I don't believe that the conservatives are necessarily any less tempted by the calling of power than the leftists. That's going to vary from situation to situation. Though I would say probably overall in the 20th century, the leftists have the worst record in terms of sheer numbers of people killed.
So I mean, it depends on how we're quantifying
not
that.
Really.
Okay,
yeah, we'll just quantify
sure.
Mao. How's that? Direct death of 100 million people. So, that's a pretty stark fact. And if we're going to argue about that, well, then we're really not going to get anywhere. So, and
I'm not disagreeing that the Holodomor happened as well. The Soviet Union and
yes,
China were horrible.
I mean, I'm not going to. Yeah, I'm not going to.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, of course.
It's a war of.
I'm just saying, for World War II, it depends on how much you attribute the war deaths to Nazi Germany, et cetera, et cetera. But sure, like largely speaking, I don't think that the left beat the right because the right wasn't trying. I don't think it's because Hitler's lack of trying led him to kill less people than who ended up dying during the Great Leap Forward or during the industrialization of the Soviet
Yes, well, I also think it's an open question still to what degree Hitler's policies were right-wing versus left-wing, and no one's done the analysis properly yet to determine that.
Well, what do we
because
consider?
It was a national socialist movement for a reason. And the socialist part of it wasn't accidental.
Well, but there was no, cooperatively formed businesses that were owned by all of the people for the people and distributed to the people. And I don't think redistribution was high on Hitler's list of things to do for.
That's true. It was a strange mix of totalitarian policy.
I don't think it was a strange mix. I think it was a bid to appeal to mid-left and center-left, the KPD and the German Socialist Party by calling themselves National Socialists. I think it was very much like an authoritarian, ultra-nationalist regime that pretty squarely fits with. People get mad if you call something far right or far left because they have
well, one of the things I would have done if I would have been able to hang on to my professorship at the University of Toronto would have been to extract out a random sample of Nazi policies and strip them of markers of their origin and present them to a set of people with conservative or leftist beliefs and see who agreed with them more. And that analysis has never been done as far as I know. So we actually don't know. And we could know if the social scientists would do their bloody job, which they don't, generally speaking. That's something we could know. We could probably use the AI systems we have now, the large language models, to determine to what degree left and right beliefs intermingled in the rise of National Socialism.
Okay, I promise we're going to start doing next 10-minute segments, but I just really, because this clip was going around on Twitter, so I have seen this before, and I really just gotta pause to say, this is just an astonishingly stupid proposed method of figuring out where somebody's politics lie. I mean, there are just so many layers of weirdness here that you're going to strip down obvious markers and then present just random people with like a random sample of like things that the Nazis did, and then use their judgments to determine whether those things are left or right. And then, if they're like 3 of them are left and 2 are right or whatever, then you conclude the Nazis were actually leftists.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. I mean, among other reasons, it seems like in terms of judging how left or right the Nazis were overall, like some policies are going to be more relevant than other policies, I mean, policies are going to be to some degree like weighted based on their salience in terms of how much they count as, in terms of representing the overall political ideology. And so just like taking like a random sample of policies is weird for that reason, among other reasons,
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, this is a much more benign example, but, this is like I talked about in my first book when Nate Silver during the 2016 primaries, yes, is the person I actually once slightly knew. I've talked the most smack about, and went to East Lansing High School with me back when, but in any case, my classmate and ELHS debate team, my co-member Nate, broke wrong, politically, and he was very, very fond of trotting out in like 538 analyses during the Democratic primaries in 2016. He was very fond of trotting out this data point that when Bernie and Hillary were both in the Senate, people say that there's this big political difference between them, but when Bernie and Hillary were both in the Senate, they voted the same way, whatever it was, 87% of the time or something. And it's like, it just always drove me crazy when he'd say this, because like, well, okay. I mean, even beyond the fact that they were only in the Senate together for like 2 years, and Hillary was actually running for president during that time, so she missed tons of votes, and presidential candidates usually come back for the votes that are most important for their base, which is why like every single Democratic candidate ever who's like running from the Senate, there's always this right-wing talking point that analysis of their voting record shows that they're the most liberal member of the Senate. 'Cause it's like, yeah, they just came back for the votes that the base cares about, right? But even if you put all that aside, it's like, it's just completely insane to think that that like the quantitative measure is going to be reasonable there. 'Cause like, well, okay, you have all kinds of like procedural votes and, votes on like budget things where every Democrat is going to be voting one way and every Republican is voting another way. But it's like, I mean, so you're counting all those votes the same way as like voting for the Iraq War, or, voting for the Patriot Act, or, proposing, Medicare for all in the Senate versus being openly against that. Like it just, it's just crazy on that level. And it's like, yeah, sure. I mean, I'm sure that like, if you just take a bunch of random things that the Nazis did, right? It's like, well, you just find a lot of things that governments of all kinds, left, right, or center, were doing, right? That like, oh, they, had to pay for the war, so they had to raise taxes, they're just doing like sort of basic, like providing like basic social services that again, even like center-right governments were also providing. And it's like, yeah, if you just take those out of context, like, well, those aren't really the things, it's like, look, these aren't really the things that were most distinctive about the Nazis, right? Like,
Right.
The things that were distinctive about the Nazis weren't that they did, some social welfare, and they had some taxes, like they built some roads, whatever. It's like it was really more the trying to wipe out the inferior races, like all that. That's really more what they're remembered for, and were primarily distinguished for at the time, right? So that's just completely insane. And also the idea that like, I mean, I don't want to sound like an academic elitist here, but it's like the idea that's like you're just gonna like ask a bunch of random people, and it's like that like whatever their judgment is about this, it's like that's what you're going with. Why, right? Why are they authoritative about this? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, like I mean, what you mentioned, like it could just be like most of the policies are uncontroversial, or there might, you take like 5 policies, most of them are uncontroversial, but then like one policy is like, it's sort of a slightly like barely left-wing policy. And then you have your one left-wing policy, and then you have a right-wing policy, which is like far, far right, like exterminate the Jews. And so it's like, oh, well, we asked a bunch of lefties and a bunch of righties. They each roughly supported 4 out of these 5 proposals. It's like, it's strange.
Yeah, it's just so like there's just no level at which this makes sense as a procedure for judging like whether anything that whether any government, right, is like left wing or right wing, that that you're going to take policies selected at random that may or may not be significant or distinctive, strip them of like things that would make it too easy, and then you're going to ask a bunch of random people with no special expertise who haven't spent any particular amount of time thinking about this what their judgment would be. I mean, it's like, yeah, I'm sure you could be like, Ronald Reagan, he did an amnesty for undocumented immigrants. He withdrew from Libya, after the attack on the Marine barracks. He did a compromise on Social Security that was like much less than what a lot of right-wing Republicans would have wanted. I'm sure you could come up with some stuff, right? Like to to paint Reagan as a leftist, or that or you could or whatever. I mean, pick pick the right policies in the right way, right? And it's and like Lenin comes out as a conservative. It's like, this is it's just not a serious way of thinking about this stuff, like as opposed to like, okay, what are the core issues that they're fighting with other political factions about, and that they would do that nobody else would do. And this is just like, and he's just so confident about it. Like, they would just do their bloody job.
Well, it's also like, even if he'd presented an analysis which was non-silly, where it's like, okay, that would be, that seems like a valid way to go about it. Like, it's strange to pretend that like, oh, in the absence of having done that, we have nothing on which to base like a reasonable probability estimate. It's like, and also, like, he mentions this method of just, if you want to do this methodology of taking people of different political ideologies and seeing how much they agree with the Nazis, well, we can almost do that. We can see, okay, let's look at the people who approve of the Nazis by and large and approve of the Nazis' legacy, and see whether they describe themselves as left-wing or right-wing. And I think the answer would be pretty clear.
Yeah. It's also, like this, I mean, to your point that about how insane it is to act like, well, even if you had come up with like a really good objective test, like you were laying out a really good objective test and not one that, is like incoherent and bizarre, like saying, oh, well, nobody has done that, so we're just in the dark. It's like, I don't know. Has anybody done the equivalent for Mao? Like, you're just you're asserting that Mao's very left wing because it's obvious and everybody knows it. But it's like, okay, if we're allowed to appeal to it's obvious and everybody knows it, I'm pretty sure what verdict that's going to give us about the Nazis.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'd be interested to hear him ask to justify his view on Stalin and Mao being examples of the failures of leftism in the absence of this kind of analysis. Yeah.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.